Welcome to the College of Education 10-Minute Research Break, a podcast devoted to highlighting research by Illinois State University's College of Education, faculty, staff, and students. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and take a break with us.
Hi, I'm Tricia Klass. Today I'm talking with Diane Dean, professor in the Educational Administration and Foundations Department. She teaches classes in higher education administration, policy, and leadership. Her book provides a snapshot of today's U.S. undergraduates enrolled in colleges from 2005 to 2014. Welcome, Diane. Thank you for talking to me about your book with co-author Art Levine.
Thank you for inviting me, Tricia.
Could you discuss the variety of data sources you and your colleagues used to create this portrait?
Sure, I'd love to. It's a multi-method, multi-year national study, and we used 3 core sources of data. The first one is a national survey of about 4,500 undergraduate college students, which we randomly selected from a stratified institutional sample of 25 institutions across the country. And we purposefully selected those to balance geographic region, Carnegie classification, and selectivity and control, whether they were public or private. The 4,500 resulting participants, that represents about a 50% response rate, because we originally sampled about 10,000 and had a usable sample of 9,000. Then the second thing we did was we went on campus site visits to 31 purposefully sampled colleges and universities across the country. The same thing with the student survey. We strove to really achieve a balance of institutional type and location, because we're really trying to get a national broad portrait, not overweighted in any one thing. But with these site visits, we were also really mindful to include some women's colleges and some minority-serving institutions. And then during those site visits, we interviewed chief student affairs officers, usually just a single interview, but some of them included members of their leadership team. We also interviewed the heads of student government associations, the editors of student newspapers, and then we did a focus group interview of about 8 to 10 undergraduates, which our campus liaisons recruited to represent a slice of their undergraduate population. And then combined, that yielded about 140 interview hours with over 350 people. So there's a tremendous amount of qualitative data in there. And we also, of course, collected observational data on each campus. We were looking at the main undergraduate library and the student center. We looked through the bookstores, the dining facilities, and the commons and the likes to really get a slice of what were students doing in their everyday activities. And we also brought home, sampled, and collected some artifacts, anything we could get our hands on that had information about campus student life. The third core source of data were national surveys of senior student affairs officers, and we did 2 of these surveys, one at the beginning and one at the end of the study. In the beginning, we took about a 10% randomly stratified sample of all nonprofit undergraduate college and universities in the U.S., and we conducted that very early on, around the same time as the student survey. But then near the end of the study, we looped back and updated our findings by surveying senior student affairs officers again. But that time, we focused just on those at the colleges and universities where we conducted the site visits. And all except one of those participated in that survey. So that's the core new data in this book. But my co-author, Arthur Levine, had conducted earlier versions of this study. So what was wonderful was we were able to compare our findings across time and use the results from his student and student affairs surveys that he had collected in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And as I said, it was a tremendous amount of data, and I'm just deeply grateful to the EAF department and my colleagues and staff there who really supported and assisted with all this data collection.
Your book discusses many unique characteristics of today's students. The 2 that were most striking to me were the digital natives and new tribalism. Can you discuss those 2?
I'd be happy to, because those were fascinating findings. When we set out to do the study, we wanted to know the effect that 9/11 had on this generation, because Arthur's prior studies had revealed that there's usually one or more signature events that will define the collective consciousness of a generation, like World War II or Vietnam might have done for my parents. But what we found, though, is that 9/11 was just a blip for these students. The new communication and information technologies were overwhelmingly the most important or key events that they said were defining for their lives. And so by digital natives, what we mean is that this generation has grown up with this stuff. They grew up with computers and the World Wide Web and email and cell phones and smartphone and texting and on and on and on. They're native to it. They were born to it versus prior generations who, I remember time without it and I've adapted to it. So as one student explained, and I love this, when we asked, how do you adapt to the tidal wave of new technologies? And he had said, it's only technology if it happened after you were born. And that was just so telling. And it revealed the framework we were coming to in our own thinking. So there's something distinctly different about growing up as a digital native versus adapting to it. And for one thing, students have very different expectations and habits concerning how they access and think of information. I mean, you've seen some of the interesting manifestations yourself as a professor in terms of how they prefer multitasking and group activities and shared work products and the like. But there's concerning things too. And I think these center around issues of information literacy, like the lack of discernment about the quality or validity of the types and sources of information they use, or even a lack of understanding about plagiarism and forms of e-cheating. That's very concerning. For another thing, social norms are just being rewritten for how they communicate and interact with one another. These new technologies, they change the way students meet, entertain, get their news, shop, participate in politics. Their communications are more rapid and casual. It's open, it's public. And there's also less depth or intimacy we found. And so these new standards of decorum are emerging. And, on a concerning side, it's creating new opportunities for incivility and privacy and safety issues are a concern. They also have a different type of internal clock. They're operating 24/7, anytime, any place. But if you think about colleges, we're still fixed locations and fixed calendars. I think we've made strides in adapting to the generation, like distance learning technologies and online course management. But if you casually poll faculty, you're still going to find sticking points, like the divergent expectations of when faculty are going to access and respond to student email, turn around assignments, and things like that. So it's very different. Tribalism or new tribalism comes out of being a digital native. What we find is that with social media and communication technologies, each student is creating a virtual tribe. It's their friends, their family, their neighbors, their acquaintances, any significant people in their life, past or present, and they're connected to these people 24/7. And they have a preference for connecting with their known associates versus those around them on campus. So the campus itself is becoming an increasingly smaller part of their life. They have declines in campus housing, attending on-campus events, academic meetings or professional clubs or lectures or debates, and yet student life has invaded the campus and the classroom because they're constantly connected with phones and social media with each other. And basically, one of the things that we're really taking away from this form of new tribalism is that all these communication and information tools we have, they should be enlarging students' world, right, in their worldview. But we see that it's doing the opposite. It's actually teasing out a circle of friends. They're setting their own perimeter, if you will, and confining themselves within that.
Right, very interesting. Those two together really are very telling, those chapters.
Yes,
those
it's
were very
full of contradictions.
Yes, it is. Now, in your last chapter, after you discuss these trends, you provide 5 recommendations for universities to consider. Could you discuss the ones you believe are the most important?
I think there's 3 that are my personal favorites. One is educating students to live in a time of profound change. And by that, we're recommending a curriculum that focuses on critical thinking, on creativity, and continual learning. And a lot of it is couched in what might be termed a liberal arts type curriculum. We're also promoting educating students for life in a diverse global society. We've done a great job focusing on multiculturalism, globalism, but we need to continue to do that and do it even more, and also add in communication skills. And then the third is to educate students for life in an evolving information economy. And by that, we realize that students today are going to enter jobs that aren't even created yet. And knowledge is growing at such a rate that it really has such a short half-life. So we're promoting an enriched major, which is broader, more interdisciplinary, and combining that with a practical minor that will give students useful skills in the workplace. And coupled with that, we think career counseling should be on steroids. And one of the things I'm really proud to say is that I think we're already hitting on or aiming at many of these recommendations, particularly with our proposed revisions to the Gen Ed curriculum.
Thank you. I'm sure today's brief conversation will encourage others to read your book, because we only could touch on a very small part of it. So thank you so much for coming and talking today.
Thank you.
The full citation is Levine and Dean, 2012, Generation on a Tightrope, a Portrait of Today's College Students. 3rd edition, Jossey-Bass, San Francisco, California. This citation can also be found at the website coe.ilstu.edu/research/podcast. Join us for future Research Break podcasts.
This podcast is sponsored by Illinois State University's College of Education, where we strive to assure that all students realize the democratic ideal through our teaching, research, and service to the field of education.